The story is called A Terrifying Incident in the Woods. My grandfather told me a story about his father, that is, my great-grandfather. It was 1930. They lived in a village, the name of which I unfortunately don't remember, but I do remember that it was across the river from the dense forest. There was no road to the village as such, only a few footpaths that people had made themselves. In the village, all the men, of course, went fishing and hunting. At that time, there were no other forms of entertainment. My great-grandfather had a dog, a huge one trained to hunt large game. He had gone with her on bear hunts and even sometimes battled wolverines. She was fearless and only obeyed my great-grandfather. In the village, all the other dogs recognized her as their leader. One day, my great-grandfather and two other men from the village went hunting with their guns and brought the dog with them. They walked around their usual spots but didn't find any game, so they decided to venture deeper into the woods. My great-grandfather walked ahead with the dog, while the other two men trailed slightly behind on either side. Occasionally, they spoke in low voices to avoid losing each other. Suddenly, one of the men stopped responding. They called out to him louder, but there was no answer. My great-grandfather started cursing and calling the dog, and they walked towards the last place they had heard from the man. The other man stayed behind where he was. They walked about 200 meters, and my great-grandfather saw that the dog was getting nervous. There must have been a bear nearby, he thought, but maybe the man had accidentally stumbled upon it, or maybe he was hiding, or maybe something else. If a bear had attacked, at least they would have heard something and been able to yell. And then, out of the corner of his eye, he saw something flash by. His dog was already baring its teeth and turning towards it. It was just an ordinary chipmunk, about 1/20th the size of his dog. He grinned and said to his dog, "Well, you found someone to bury your teeth at." But as soon as he said it, he felt his hands go numb. The gun lowered itself and his legs gave out, as if he had fallen into a trance, unable to do anything about it. He fell face down on the ground. Before he hit the ground, he saw his dog do the same, as if its legs had been cut out from under it. He lay there and heard someone walking heavily nearby, first on one side, then on the other, and breathing heavily with a wheeze, but he couldn't move at all. Then he heard his dog give a sharp yelp, something crunching, and then silence and retreating footsteps. He didn't know how long he lay there. Gradually, his body began to obey him again. He jumped up, his hands shaking, the gun swinging from side to side, but his dog was nowhere to be found. Tears filled his eyes when he realized what that crunch had been. He tried to follow whoever had taken his dog, but there were no tracks, nothing. The man who had stayed where they parted spoke up, and then, out of the corner of his eye, he saw something flash by. His dog was already baring its teeth and turning towards it. It was just an ordinary chipmunk, about 1/20th the size of his dog. He grinned and said to his dog, "Well, you found someone to bury your teeth at." But as soon as he said it, he felt his hands go numb. The gun lowered itself and his legs gave out, as if he had fallen into a trance, unable to do anything about it. He fell face down on the ground. Before he hit the ground, he saw his dog do the same, as if its legs had been cut out from under it. He lay there and heard someone walking heavily nearby, first on one side, then on the other, and breathing heavily with a wheeze, but he couldn't move at all. Then he heard his dog give a sharp yelp, something crunching, and then silence and retreating footsteps. He didn't know how long he lay there. Gradually, his body began to obey him again. He jumped up, his hands shaking, the gun swinging from side to side, but his dog was nowhere to be found. Tears filled his eyes when he realized what that crunch had been. He tried to follow whoever had taken his dog, but there were no tracks, nothing. The man who had stayed where they parted spoke up. "Don't you believe it? Maybe someone else playing a joke on you?" "No, they say they checked within a radius of 20 meters, searched every bush, and there were a lot of us. I wasn't with them for a few days because of a leg injury, so I didn't leave the house. They say," and I see frightened faces, "they re not in the mood for jokes." "And then what?" I ask. "It is scary." That scream spreads quickly through the forest, and it feels like such horror attacks from all sides at once. It is bone-chilling, and we can't bear this horror, so we run away from there and have been doing so for 3 days in a row. I said, "Okay, I'll go with you today." I am curious myself, who is laughing at them? But I don't believe it. In the evening, our company gathered, at the edge of the forest, near the gardens and houses. As always, we made a fire, sat at the table, chatted. It was 23:55, I remember it clearly. And then I suddenly felt uncomfortable. Then that same friend who invited me stood up and whispered, "Quiet, it is starting now." Strangely enough, everyone fell silent. In the distance, we heard a scream. At first it was muffled, then it got louder and louder every second. It was moving from everywhere in the forest. We all stood up and listened for about 2 minutes. Primitive terror engulfed me, and I shuddered with disgust. It became very cold, bone-chilling, and just when it seemed that this screaming thing was about to show itself, we ran away. My heart was beating so hard, it felt like it was going to jump out of my chest. We ran out onto the road, and I stood there like a stone. My friend told me that they were trying to bring me back to my senses for about 10 minutes by shaking me, hitting me in the face, and pouring water on me. I can't say for sure why I didn't react to them, even though I was conscious. I only remember that the screaming was ringing in my head. I was looking through my friends and didn't notice the commotion around me. Finally, I came to, as if someone had snapped their fingers loudly by my ear. It was a slap that woke me up. I started to stutter. The first thing I asked was what happened. They told me they didn't know and that the sound they heard was the same as mine. They said they wouldn't take me there again and that if they knew, they wouldn't have invited me. They said I scared them all very badly and they thought I would stay like that, looking through them. Luckily, I stopped stuttering when I calmed down and came to my senses. We never went there again, even during the day. The continuation and resolution came a month later. The police began to roam the village, searching for a missing girl in the neighboring district. Then they started to search in the forest, and a few days later they found her, or rather what was left of her. It was a foot and a shoe on a pile of ashes. It happened like this. A girl was hitchhiking in a neighboring village, wanting to get to a summer camp and for some reason decided to go there at night. They saw her getting into a white car, but didn't notice the license plate or make of the car because it was dark. These people drove her to the woods and all 3 of them raped her. The bastards realized they couldn't leave her alive and decided to burn her alive. They wouldn't have been caught if one of them hadn't gone to the police and confessed. According to him, this girl visits him every night in his dreams and doesn't let him rest. He showed them the place where they had disposed of her. Could it be that the ghost of that girl was screaming at night? Apparently, poor thing wanted to be found. The next story is about an encounter with an unknown entity in the woods. I have an uncle who is absolutely fearless. They say that when he used to live in the village, he loved to go hunting alone in the woods. He would disappear for 2 or 3 days and bring back carcasses of various animals. I don't understand how he survived there without a compass or anything, how he slept at night, and most importantly, why he did all this. He is just a person in the best sense of the word, a Neanderthal, an ancient man, a cave dweller. Despite all this, he is not antisocial and very kind. Now for the story itself. He didn't tell me personally. I heard it from relatives. There was some kind of holiday, and men from different families gathered on the street. They were chatting while the women and children were at home. I was with them. Here's what they were telling. On one of his trips, he ventured too deep into the forest and stumbled upon a pack of hungry wolves. Uncle fired a shot into the air. He had a gun. The wolves didn't react and continued coming towards him, so he pointed the gun at them and was about to shoot. The wolves that were approaching him suddenly stopped and looked around fearfully. They looked back, and some of them fell to their knees and collapsed, losing consciousness. Two wolves clung to my uncle's legs and whined, hiding their heads at his feet. They say their foreheads were pressed against his trousers. When he saw this, he became uneasy, and in the next moment, a dark, tall silhouette with human-like outlines appeared in the air right in front of him. The creature's shoulders, torso, arms, and enormous head seemed to be made of rags, like something smoky, reminiscent of a shadow. Uncle stood in shock, face to face with this creature for a long time. They just stood and looked at each other silently. Then the shadow turned around and disappeared into the forest, without touching either him or the wolves. That day, my uncle returned from there shaken. He stopped going into the woods and became afraid. He developed a fear. So, what was that? After hearing the story, to be honest, I myself became scared.